In May 2023, in the backyard of an apparently ordinary house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a desperate father picked up a shovel and began digging underneath his neighbor's dog kennel, driven by an intuition that had grown during 8 years of torture. What Michael Anderson found buried in that location would forever change not only his family, but the entire community that had searched for his son Kevin for nearly a decade. For 8 years, the Anderson family, neighbors, and investigators wondered what had happened to Kevin Anderson, a 7-year-old boy who disappeared literally at the door of his own home in June 2015. For 8 years, they scoured parks, rivers, forests, and distant cities, searching for clues about the whereabouts of a child who had his whole life ahead of him. For 8 years, the answer they sought was buried just 50 meters away, in the backyard of the neighbor who helped with the searches. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you won't miss our next cases. Today, we're going to uncover one of the most shocking missing child cases in recent American history. A story that demonstrates how sometimes evil hides behind the most familiar faces, and how a father's persistence can finally bring the truth to light. This is the story of an innocent boy who was betrayed by someone his family trusted, of a community that united in the search but was deceived for years, and of how a father who refused to give up finally discovered a truth so devastating that it forever changed how we think about child safety in our own neighborhoods. Prepare yourself for a revelation that will prove that sometimes monsters aren't strangers. They live right next to us. Kevin Anderson was only 7 years old in June 2015, but he already demonstrated the vibrant and curious personality that made him the center of attention in any environment he frequented. With his light blonde hair that could never stay properly combed and his bright blue eyes that seemed to capture every interesting detail of the world around him, Kevin was known by everyone on Maple Street as the child who brightened anyone's day with his contagious smile. His small height for his age, only 1 meter 15 centimeters, and thin frame reflected his active and energetic nature. Kevin was constantly in motion, whether running through the yard, climbing trees, or exploring every corner of his neighborhood with the insatiable curiosity that characterized his personality. He always wore his favorite red sneakers, a birthday gift from his grandmother that he refused to change even when they began to get too small. Kevin was the son of Michael Anderson, a 34-year-old mechanic who had worked at the family shop for 15 years, and Lisa Anderson, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher known for her infinite patience and dedication to students. The family lived in a 2-story house with a large yard on Maple Street, a quiet residential street where children could still play outside until dark without parents worrying. Kevin was the type of child who would make friends with anyone in 5 minutes, Lisa Anderson recalled with a melancholic smile. He didn't know strangers, only friends he hadn't met yet. It was an adorable quality, but one that always made us a little nervous because he was very trusting with adults. Kevin's natural curiosity was legendary in the neighborhood. He asked questions about everything: why the sky was blue, how cars worked, why dogs wagged their tails, how plants grew. Michael often joked that Kevin would ask 100 questions before breakfast and another 200 before dinner. He had a thirst for knowledge that was impressive for a 7-year-old child, Michael explained. Kevin attended Cedar Rapids Elementary School, where he was finishing 1st grade with excellent grades and consistently positive reports from teachers who described him as eager to learn and a joy to have in class. Mrs. Patricia Martinez, his teacher, specifically remembered Kevin as the child who always raised his hand first and who helped struggling classmates without being asked. Kevin had a natural empathy that was rare in children so young, Mrs. Martinez explained. If a child was sad, Kevin was the first to offer comfort. If someone was confused with the lesson, Kevin tried to explain in his own words. He had a golden heart. During weekends and school holidays, Kevin spent most of his time playing in the family yard or exploring the neighborhood under casual parental supervision. Maple Street was the type of community where everyone knew everyone, and Kevin was considered practically a mascot of the street. He had permission to play in the yards of 5 different families, all of whom looked after him as if he were family. Kevin's favorite pastime was building forts and tree houses with scraps he found around the neighborhood. Michael had taught his son the basics of using tools, and Kevin spent countless hours building elaborate structures that demonstrated impressive creativity. He was always building something, Michael remembered proudly. It didn't matter if it was a dollhouse for his sister or a bike ramp. Kevin saw possibilities where others saw only trash. Kevin was also known for his kindness to animals. He fed stray cats, helped neighbors walk, dogs, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian when he grew up. Kevin told me at least once a week that when he was an adult, he was going to cure all the sick animals in the world, Lisa recalled. He genuinely believed he could make a difference in the life of every animal he encountered. The Anderson family maintained weekly traditions that Kevin loved. Saturday mornings were for special pancakes and cartoons. Sunday afternoons were for visits to the maternal grandparents' house, where Kevin could play with his cousins and help Grandpa in the garden. Tuesday nights were family game nights, where Kevin invariably chose board games that allowed him to ask the most elaborate questions possible. Kevin turned every activity into an adventure, Michael explained. A simple trip to the supermarket became an expedition where he made observations about everything: why certain fruits were more expensive, how credit card machines worked, why people chose specific products. It was exhausting sometimes, but it also reminded us to see the world through a child's eyes. Kevin also demonstrated surprising emotional maturity for his age. When Lisa had a difficult week at school due to problems with a particularly challenging student, Kevin drew a series of emotional support cards and hid them around the house for her to find during the week. He had a natural ability to perceive when people needed extra affection, Lisa remembered. In the Maple Street neighborhood, Kevin was known for organizing backyard Olympics during the summer, where he convinced other children to participate in elaborate competitions he invented. Sack races, sandcastle building competitions, jump rope tournaments. Kevin always found ways to include all children, regardless of age or ability. Kevin had a natural gift for positive leadership, observed Robert Thompson, a neighbor who lived 3 houses ahead. He never excluded anyone from games, and always found ways to make each child feel special and included. It was the type of leadership you expected to see in adults, not in a 7-year-old child. Kevin also maintained a special relationship with Harold Pierce, a 67-year-old retired neighbor who lived in the house next door. Pierce had offered to help take care of Kevin during the summers when Lisa wasn't working, and the two had developed a friendship that seemed genuine and mutually beneficial. Kevin always visited Mr. Pierce to hear stories about the old days and help with small yard projects, Michael recalled without suspicion. It was this confident, curious, and deeply loved child by all who knew him, who, on the sunny morning of June 22, 2015, woke up excited for the first day of summer vacation, never imagining that this would be the last day his family would see him smile. Kevin Anderson was about to become the center of a mystery that would consume an entire community and reveal that sometimes evil hides behind the most familiar and trustworthy faces. The morning of June 22nd, 2015 dawned with the type of humid heat that promised a perfect day for children to play outdoors. The temperature was already 26 degrees Celsius at 8 o'clock in the morning, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that made the leaves of the Maple Street trees dance gently. For Kevin Anderson, it was exactly the type of day he had dreamed about during the last weeks of school, the official first day of summer vacation. Kevin had awakened at 7 o'clock in the morning, much earlier than his parents. Such was his excitement, with the prospect of 3 whole months of freedom. Lisa Anderson found her son in the kitchen at 7:30, already dressed in blue shorts, a Superman t-shirt that was his favorite, and his characteristic red sneakers. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook, making an elaborate list of summer adventures that included building a fort, learning to skateboard, and teaching tricks to Rex, the family's golden retriever. Kevin was practically vibrating with excitement, Lisa remembered. He had planned every day of vacation with the type of detail that most adults don't use, even to plan vacations. Each item on the list had sub-items and a schedule. It was impressive and adorable at the same time. After breakfast, which consisted of cereal, fruit, and milk, a meal that Kevin devoured while talking incessantly about his plans for the day, he asked permission to play in the front yard. Michael Anderson, who was getting ready to leave for work, reminded his son of the basic rules. Stay on the family property, don't leave the street without warning, and come inside if any adult he didn't know tried to talk to him. Kevin knew all the safety rules by heart, Michael explained. We had talked about stranger danger hundreds of times. He knew not to accept candy from strangers, get into cars with people he didn't know, or leave our street without explicit permission. He had never broken these rules before. At 8:45, Michael left for work, waving to Kevin, who was in the front yard, building a sort of fortress using branches he had collected during the previous week. He was completely absorbed in the project, Michael recalled. He shouted, "Bye, Daddy. I'm going to build the best fort in the world," and continued working. It was a completely normal and reassuring scene. Lisa remained at home during the morning, taking advantage of the first day of school vacation to do household chores she had postponed during the school year. She checked on Kevin every 20 to 30 minutes, watching him through the living room window or going out briefly to bring him water or snacks. Throughout the morning, Kevin remained in the front yard, occasionally running to the backyard to get more materials for his construction. At 10:30, Kevin received a visit from Sarah Davis, an 8-year-old neighbor who lived 2 houses ahead. The two spent approximately 1 hour playing together, with Sarah helping Kevin refine the architecture of his fort, and the two inventing elaborate stories about who would live in the structure when it was complete. Kevin was teaching Sarah how to make resistant knots to tie the branches, Lisa observed from the window. He had learned basic techniques from Michael and was proud to be able to teach someone. They were laughing and having fun, exactly as 7- and 8-year-old children should be doing during summer vacation. Sarah Davis left at 11:45 because her mother had called her for lunch, leaving Kevin alone again with his construction project. He waved to Sarah and shouted, "I'm going to finish the east wall before you come back," a statement that Sarah vividly remembered years later, because it was the last thing she heard Kevin say. During the next 40 minutes, Kevin continued working alone on his fort. Lisa checked on him through the window at 12:15 and saw him organizing branches by size, apparently planning the next phase of his construction. He was talking to himself, as he always did when he was concentrated on a project, Lisa recalled. Kevin always narrated his activities when he was working alone. It was as if he was explaining his processes to an invisible audience. At 12:30, Lisa began preparing lunch for herself and Kevin, planning to call him inside in 15 minutes. She was in the kitchen seasoning sandwiches when she heard Rex, the family's golden retriever, barking in the backyard. The barking was insistent but not alarming, more like Rex had seen a squirrel or other small animal. It was at 12:45 that Lisa went out to call Kevin for lunch. The front yard was empty. The branches that Kevin had been organizing remained exactly where he had left them, and there was a small pile of ropes near the spot where he had been working. But Kevin had disappeared completely. My first reaction was to assume that he had gone to the bathroom or entered through the back door without my seeing, Lisa explained. There were no signs of struggle. Nothing was messy beyond the normal construction work he was doing. It seemed as if he had simply evaporated. Lisa quickly searched the entire house, calling Kevin's name and checking all the rooms, bathrooms, basement, and attic. She then checked the backyard, garage, and even the interior of the family's 2 cars. Kevin was nowhere on the property. At 1 o'clock, Lisa began to feel the first real signs of panic. She went out to the street and began calling Kevin's name loudly, hoping he would respond from some neighboring yard where he might have gone to play. Several neighbors heard her calls and came out to help, including Harold Pierce, the retired neighbor who had developed a friendship with Kevin. Mrs. Anderson seemed worried, so I immediately offered to help search. Harold Pierce later told investigators, "Kevin was like a grandson to me, and it wasn't like him to disappear without warning. We began systematically checking all the neighborhood yards. At 1:30, when Kevin had been missing for 45 minutes, and informal neighborhood searches had produced no clues, Lisa Anderson made the decision to call the police. I know that 45 minutes may not seem like a long time for a child to be out of sight, she told the 911 operator, but Kevin never, not once, left our property without permission. Something is wrong. Detective Sergeant Maria Rodriguez was the first officer to respond to the call, arriving at Maple Street at 2:15. With 15 years of experience in cases involving missing children, Rodriguez understood that the first hours were absolutely critical. When a 7-year-old child disappears from his own property without explanation, you have to assume the worst-case scenario and work quickly, she explained. Rodriguez conducted a detailed interview with Lisa Anderson, establishing a precise timeline of Kevin's movements during the morning and identifying all the people who had interacted with him. She also questioned Lisa about possible family problems, disputed custody, or any person who might have reasons to take Kevin. Lisa Anderson was completely cooperative and transparent, Rodriguez observed. There were no indications of family problems, domestic abuse, or custody issues. The family seemed stable and loving, and there were no reasons to suspect parental involvement. Simultaneously, other officers began conducting a systematic search of the immediate neighborhood, initially focusing on a 3-block radius around the Anderson house. They checked yards, garages, abandoned houses, and any location where a small child could be hidden, lost, or trapped. During the first 2 hours of search, investigators interviewed all neighbors who were home, including Harold Pierce, who was considered a valuable witness due to his friendship with Kevin and position as immediate neighbor. Mr. Pierce was extremely helpful, Rodriguez recalled. He offered detailed information about Kevin's routine, mentioned that he had seen the child working on his construction project during the morning, and even suggested additional locations where Kevin liked to play. Pierce explained to investigators that Kevin frequently visited his yard to help with small gardening projects, and that the two had developed a friendship based on shared interests in construction and tools. Kevin was fascinated by how things worked, Pierce said. He always asked questions about my carpentry projects and loved helping with simple tasks. He was a very special boy. A significant initial discovery was that none of the neighbors had seen Kevin leave the Anderson property or noticed any suspicious activity during the relevant period. Sarah Davis, the last child to play with Kevin, confirmed that he seemed completely normal and happy when she left at 11:45. There was no evidence that Kevin had voluntarily left the property, Rodriguez explained. His construction projects were half finished, as if he intended to return to them. There were no notes, no previous behavior pattern that suggested running away, and no reason for him to want to leave home during the first day of his long-awaited vacation. At 4 o'clock, when Kevin had been missing for more than 3 hours, the search was officially expanded to include teams specialized in missing children. Detective Captain Robert Wilson assumed coordination of the investigation, mobilizing additional resources that included tracking dogs, search helicopter, and trained volunteers. Michael Anderson was contacted at his work at 4:30 and arrived home at 5 o'clock to find Maple Street transformed into an emergency operations center. Seeing all those police cars and search teams on my street was when reality really hit me, Michael recalled. Until that moment, part of me still hoped that Kevin would appear with some innocent explanation about where he had been. Analysis of the Anderson house revealed no signs of forced entry, struggle, or any evidence that Kevin had been removed against his will. His clothes, favorite toys, and even his weekly allowance of $5 remained untouched in his room. Everything indicated that Kevin expected to return home, Wilson observed. During the first week of investigation, more than 200 people participated in the searches, including neighbors, community members, and volunteers from organizations specialized in missing children. They systematically covered a 15-kilometer radius around the Anderson house, checking parks, forested areas, bodies of water, and abandoned properties. Harold Pierce was particularly active in the searches, organizing groups of neighbors and offering his property as a base of operations for volunteers. Mr. Pierce seemed genuinely devastated by Kevin's disappearance, recalled Jennifer Martinez, a neighbor who participated in the searches. He worked more hours than anyone else and seemed to take the situation very personally. An initial theory focused on the possibility that Kevin had been lured away from home by someone he knew and trusted. Children. Kevin's age rarely go with strangers, Detective Wilson explained. Statistically, when a child disappears from his own property, without signs of struggle, it usually involves someone familiar, a relative, family friend, or neighbor that the child wouldn't hesitate to accompany. Investigators conducted extensive background checks on all adults living within a 10-block radius of the Anderson house. They found 2 men with minor criminal records, one for drunk driving and another for marijuana possession, but neither had a history of crimes against children or behavior that made them viable suspects. Harold Pierce underwent background checks like all other neighbors, Wilson explained. His record was completely clean. No arrests, no charges, not even significant traffic tickets. He had been a high school teacher for 35 years before retiring, with impeccable records and excellent recommendations from colleagues and supervisors. After 2 intensive weeks of searches involving hundreds of volunteers and substantial resources from multiple agencies, the investigation had produced no physical evidence or reliable clues about Kevin Anderson's whereabouts. The case gained national media attention when the story of a child who disappeared from his own yard captured the imagination and parental fears of families across the country. For the Anderson family, Kevin's disappearance became an obsession that completely consumed their lives. How do you continue living normally when your 7-year-old son simply disappears? Michael asked during an anguished interview. Every sound, every child you see on the street, every phone call, everything becomes a possible clue or a possible devastation. The Kevin Anderson case became one of Iowa's most documented child disappearances, generating theories ranging from kidnapping by strangers to more sinister possibilities involving people close to the family. But for everyone involved in the investigation, a central question remained terrifyingly simple. How could a child disappear completely from his own property in broad daylight, in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone? The years that followed, Kevin Anderson's disappearance were marked by pain that slowly transformed from acute despair into growing suspicion that consumed Michael Anderson's soul. For a father who had lost his only son under inexplicable circumstances, the impossibility of finding answers became an obsession that would eventually lead him to make the most desperate decision of his life. Lisa Anderson never managed to return completely to teaching. After a year of medical leave, she returned to elementary school, but colleagues noted a fundamental change in her personality. The teacher who had previously radiated infinite patience and genuine joy with children had become someone who visibly struggled not to see Kevin in every 7-year-old student she taught. Lisa tried to maintain a normal appearance, but you could see the pain in her eyes whenever a child laughed, the same way Kevin used to laugh, observed Sandra Wilson, principal of the school where Lisa worked. She frequently left the classroom during recess because seeing children playing in the park reminded her too much of the last happy moments she had witnessed of her son. Michael Anderson kept his job at the mechanic shop, but transformed his nights and weekends into a tireless campaign to find Kevin. During the first 3 years after 2015, he spent more than $65,000 of their savings hiring private investigators, psychics, and missing persons specialists. Every potential clue, no matter how remote, received complete investigation and financial resources the family couldn't really afford to spend. Michael became obsessed in a way that was simultaneously admirable and worrying, explained James Thompson, his best friend and co-worker. He maintained detailed maps of all the areas he had searched, files on every person who had been interviewed, and theories about what could have happened. His tool room transformed into a command center for finding Kevin. During the years of searching, Michael developed growing suspicion about Harold Pierce, the retired neighbor who had been so helpful during the initial investigations. It wasn't based on concrete evidence, but on small inconsistencies and observations that accumulated over time and created a persistent intuition that something wasn't right. I began to notice small things about Mr. Pierce that bothered me, Michael explained. He always seemed to know details about our family routine that I didn't remember sharing with him. He asked questions about Kevin that seemed innocent on the surface, but had a tone that made me uncomfortable when I reflected on them later. Michael observed that Pierce had installed a high fence around his backyard approximately 6 months after Kevin's disappearance, claiming concerns about privacy and security. He also noticed that Pierce had acquired 2 large German Shepherd dogs that he kept in kennels in the backyard, a dramatic change for a man who had never shown interest in pets during the 15 years he had been the Anderson family's neighbor. Pierce's yard transformation was radical, Michael observed. Before Kevin disappeared, it was an open and inviting space where he and Kevin worked on small projects together. Afterward, it became a fortress with high fences, security cameras, and dogs that barked aggressively at anyone who approached. Detective Captain Robert Wilson, who had coordinated the original investigation, retired in 2019 without ever having found conclusive evidence about Kevin's fate. In his final reflections on the case, Wilson admitted that the total absence of physical clues or witnesses had created a mystery that defied conventional solutions. "The Kevin Anderson case was the most frustrating of my career," Wilson said during a retirement interview. "Children don't simply disappear into thin air, especially not from their own yards in residential neighborhoods during the day. I always believed that someone in the ETSU community knew more than they were admitting, but we never managed to identify who or obtain sufficient evidence for legal action." The official investigation continued active for 5 years, from 2015 to 2020, but resources dedicated to the case gradually diminished as other priorities emerged, and new clues became increasingly rare. Detective Sarah Martinez, who took over the case after Wilson's retirement, conducted annual evidence reviews but never discovered information that justified reopening a complete investigation. Theories about the disappearance evolved significantly during the 8 years of mystery. Initially, investigators focused on conventional possibilities: kidnapping by strangers, unlikely escape, or accidents that resulted in Kevin being taken away from the area. In 2019, when all these theories had been exhaustively explored, suspicions about people close to the family began to emerge. Dr. Patricia Johnson, a psychologist specializing in crimes against children, developed a theory in 2020 that Kevin had been killed by someone he knew and trusted, possibly someone in the immediate neighborhood who would have had easy access to the child and detailed knowledge about family routines. Statistically, when a child disappears from his own property without traces, the perpetrator is usually someone geographically close, Dr. Johnson explained. The person needs to know the family's movements, have access to the child without arousing suspicion, and ability to dispose of evidence quickly before intensive searches begin. Harold Pierce remained in the neighborhood during all 8 years, apparently living a normal, retired life. He continued being cordial with the Anderson family, although interactions became progressively more tense as Michael's suspicions grew. Pierce occasionally offered words of support or suggestions about where to look for Kevin, gestures that Michael began interpreting as potential psychological manipulations. Pierce always seemed to know exactly what to say to keep hopes alive without offering substantive information, Michael observed. He mentioned vague sightings or theories about Kevin being taken to other cities, always providing enough hope to keep searches active, but never specific details that could be verified. Michael began conducting informal surveillance of Pierce, observing his movement patterns, visitors, and yard activities, through his window or during casual walks through the neighborhood. For 3 years, he meticulously documented Pierce's habits, looking for inconsistencies or behaviors that could reveal hidden secrets. "I knew I was crossing ethical and possibly legal lines," Michael later admitted. "But when you've lost your son and the police can't find answers, you do things you would normally never consider. I needed to know the truth, even if it meant risking everything." Michael's obsession with Pierce created significant tensions in his marriage with Lisa, who was concerned that her husband's suspicions were becoming unhealthy and potentially dangerous. Michael was consumed by the idea that Pierce knew something about Kevin, Lisa explained. "I understood his need for answers, but I was terrified that his actions could result in legal problems or violent confrontations." In 2022, 7 years after the disappearance, Kevin Anderson was officially declared dead by an Iowa court. The decision was devastating for Michael and Lisa, who had maintained hope for 7 years. "Legally, our son is dead," Michael said during an emotional statement. "But without a body, without concrete evidence of what happened, part of us can never completely accept this reality." In May 2023, 8 years after Kevin Anderson's disappearance, Michael reached the breaking point that would lead him to take the most desperate action of his life. A series of observations, during the previous weeks, had intensified his suspicions about Harold Pierce to a level he could no longer ignore or passively endure. Pierce had begun making improvements to his yard that seemed designed to cover something up, Michael later explained. He installed a new deck exactly over the area where his dogs stayed chained, and began a landscaping project that involved adding new soil and planting dense shrubs in specific areas of the yard. Michael had also noticed that Pierce seemed nervous and evasive during recent casual conversations, a stark contrast to his historically open and helpful behavior. When Michael casually mentioned that he was considering hiring a private investigator to conduct searches with soil detection equipment, Pierce had become visibly agitated and changed the subject abruptly. Pierce's reaction was a massive red flag, Michael observed. An innocent neighbor who had helped with searches for 8 years should have been enthusiastic about any new technology that could find Kevin. But Pierce seemed almost panicked by the idea of advanced soil searches. On the morning of May 15, 2023, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He had observed that Pierce left every Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning to do shopping and medical appointments, a routine that had remained consistent for years. With Lisa at work and Pierce away from home, Michael had a window of opportunity of approximately 3 hours. "I knew I was committing trespassing and possibly other crimes," Michael admitted. "But 8 years of not knowing what happened to my son had led me to a point where legal considerations seemed secondary to finding truth. I needed to know if my suspicions were correct." Michael entered Pierce's yard through a side gate that he had observed being left unlocked during previous surveillance. He had brought a shovel, gardening gloves, and a phone camera to document anything he found. His initial target was the area below the dog kennels, where he had noted that the soil seemed different in color and texture compared to surrounding areas. The dogs were barking furiously, but I was beyond the point of being deterred by noise or fear of discovery, Michael said. Every shovelful of earth I removed felt like I was maybe one step closer to finding my son, or at least proving that my suspicions were wrong. After approximately 40 minutes of careful excavation, Michael's shovel hit something that clearly wasn't stone or root system. It was something softer and manufactured, buried approximately 3 feet below surface. Continuing to dig carefully, he uncovered fragments of blue fabric that he immediately recognized as similar to the shorts that Kevin had been wearing on the day of his disappearance. "When I saw that blue fabric, my world literally stopped," Michael recalled. "For 8 years, I had imagined this moment hundreds of times, but nothing could have prepared me for the actual shock of finding evidence that suggested my son had been murdered and buried practically in our backyard." Michael continued excavating carefully, documenting each discovery with photographs. Within an additional half-hour, he had uncovered more clothing fragments, small bone pieces that appeared to be human, and a red tennis shoe that was unmistakably one of Kevin's favorite pair that he had been wearing when he disappeared. Finding Kevin's shoe was the moment when certainty replaced suspicion, Michael explained. "For 8 years, I had hoped that maybe he had somehow escaped or been taken somewhere distant. But seeing that red tennis shoe, partially decomposed but still recognizable, confirmed that my worst fears had been realized." At 12:30 p.m., Michael made the phone call that would change everything. Using his cell phone, he contacted Detective Sarah Martinez directly, bypassing 911 operators to reach someone who was familiar with Kevin's case. "Detective Martinez, this is Michael Anderson. I found Kevin. He's buried in Harold Pierce's backyard, underneath where the dogs stay chained." The response was immediate and coordinated. Detective Martinez arrived at Pierce's residence at 1:15 p.m., followed by forensic teams, medical examiner Dr. Robert Chen, and additional officers who established a crime scene perimeter. Pierce, who had returned from his weekly errands at 1:45 p.m., was immediately detained for questioning when he discovered police presence on his property. Pierce's reaction when he saw police digging in his yard was telling, Detective Martinez observed. He didn't express surprise or concern about potential findings. Instead, he became immediately defensive and requested a lawyer before anyone had even questioned him about anything. It's the type of reaction you'd expect from someone who knew exactly what was buried on his property. The forensic excavation lasted 3 complete days. Each piece of evidence was carefully documented, photographed in place, and removed using protocols designed to preserve integrity for legal proceedings. Among items recovered were Kevin's complete outfit from the day of disappearance, small bone fragments consistent with a child Kevin's age, and personal items including a small toy car that Kevin had been carrying in his pocket. The preservation of evidence was remarkable considering 8 years of burial, Dr. Chen explained. The combination of soil, composition, depth of burial, and protection from Pierce's dogs had created conditions that preserved both organic and inorganic materials sufficiently for definitive identification. On May 18, 2023, 3 days after Michael's initial discovery, DNA analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to Kevin Anderson. Harold Pierce was formally charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and concealment of a human corpse. During interrogation, Pierce initially denied involvement, but when confronted with DNA evidence and witness testimony, he eventually provided a partial confession. Pierce admitted to luring Kevin into his house on June 22, 2015, using promise of showing him a new woodworking project, Detective Martinez revealed. According to his statement, Kevin became upset when Pierce made inappropriate physical advances, and Pierce killed him in a panic to prevent Kevin from telling anyone about the incident. The discovery not only resolved the mystery of Kevin Anderson's disappearance, but also exposed a predator who had been living next door to families with young children for decades. Investigation of Pierce's background revealed prior suspicious incidents that had never been officially reported, and evidence suggested that Kevin may not have been his first victim. For Michael Anderson, finding his son after 8 years of uncertainty brought a mixture of relief and devastating grief. Knowing what happened to Kevin doesn't bring him back, Michael said during an emotional statement, but it means that we finally have truth. Justice can be served, and other children will be protected from this monster who was hiding in plain sight. Harold Pierce's complete confession to authorities revealed a reality even more disturbing than anyone had imagined during the 8 years of mystery. Dr. Robert Chen worked with a team of forensic specialists to reconstruct not only the events of June 22, 2015, but also the predatory behavior pattern that Pierce had kept hidden for decades while living as an apparently respectable and trustworthy neighbor. Psychological analysis of Pierce revealed a classic profile of a sexual predator who had used his profession as a teacher and his position as a respected neighbor to gain access to children. Dr. Patricia Martinez, specialist in crimes against minors, explained that Pierce had developed over decades a sophisticated strategy to identify, groom, and attack vulnerable victims. Pierce confessed that he had observed Kevin for months, studying his routines, preferences, and family dynamics. Dr. Martinez explained. He deliberately cultivated a friendship with Kevin through carpentry and gardening projects, creating opportunities to be alone with the child and normalizing physical contact that gradually became inappropriate. The reconstruction of the events of June 22, 2015 showed that Pierce had taken advantage of a moment when Kevin was alone in the yard to invite him to see a special project in his garage. Kevin, who trusted Pierce completely due to the friendship they had developed, followed him willingly, never suspecting that he was walking into a trap that would cost his life. Pierce admitted that his intention was sexual assault, not murder, Detective Martinez revealed. According to his statement, Kevin became frightened and started crying when Pierce made physical advances. Pierce panicked about Kevin telling his parents, and in a moment of rage and fear, he struck Kevin multiple times with a hammer that was in his garage. Forensic analysis confirmed that Kevin had died from multiple blunt force trauma to his head, and that Pierce had then wrapped his body in plastic tarp and buried him in a shallow grave in his backyard. Pierce had deliberately chosen the location underneath where he planned to build dog kennels, knowing that the animals would deter anyone from investigating unusual odors or soil disturbances. Pierce's cover-up was methodical and sophisticated, explained Dr. Chen. He constructed the dog kennels within days of the murder, ensuring that the animals would prevent detection of remains. He also participated actively in search efforts, offering suggestions and comfort to the family while knowing exactly where Kevin was buried. The expanded investigation revealed that Pierce had likely committed similar crimes during his 35-year career as a teacher. 3 former students, now adults, came forward with allegations of inappropriate touching and grooming behavior that they had never reported due to Pierce's respected position in the community. While these incidents couldn't be prosecuted due to statutes of limitations, they painted a picture of long-term predatory behavior. Pierce had been a threat to children for decades, Detective Martinez observed. His clean criminal record and respected position as educator provided perfect cover for his activities. Families trusted him implicitly, giving him access to children that he exploited repeatedly. Michael Anderson's decision to conduct his own investigation, while legally questionable, ultimately brought justice that might never have been achieved through conventional law enforcement. Legal experts debated whether his illegal excavation would compromise the case against Pierce, but prosecutors determined that the evidence was admissible under exigent circumstances doctrine. Michael's actions were understandable given the circumstances, explained District Attorney Sarah Johnson. A father who had exhausted all legal options and lived with uncertainty for 8 years took desperate measures that ultimately served justice. While we cannot officially condone trespassing, the results speak for themselves. Pierce was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and concealment of evidence in September 2023. During sentencing, he offered a statement that many viewed as self-serving rather than genuinely remorseful. "I want Kevin's family to know that I never intended for this to happen," Pierce said. "Kevin was a special boy, and I lost control in a moment of weakness that I regret every day." Michael Anderson responded to Pierce's statement with controlled fury. "You didn't lose control in a moment. You planned and groomed my son for months. You participated in searches for years while knowing exactly where he was. You're not sorry that this happened. You're sorry that you got caught." Pierce was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. At 75 years old, he will die in prison, an outcome that brought some measure of satisfaction to a family that had suffered for almost a decade. During victim impact statements, Lisa Anderson delivered a powerful message that highlighted the lasting damage Pierce had inflicted. "You didn't just kill our son," Lisa told Pierce during sentencing. "You stole 8 years of our lives, destroyed our ability to trust, and robbed us of ability to grieve properly. Every day for 8 years, we hoped Kevin might come home. You sat in our kitchen, drank our coffee, and listened to our pain while knowing you had murdered our child. The discovery also led to changes in how missing children cases are investigated. The Iowa Department of Public Safety implemented new protocols requiring more thorough investigation of neighbors and family friends, recognizing that predators often hide in plain sight within trusted community circles. Kevin's case taught us that we need to look more carefully at people who seem most helpful and concerned, explained Detective Martinez. Predators often insert themselves into investigations to monitor progress and deflect suspicion. We now pay special attention to anyone who seems overly invested in case details or offers unusually specific suggestions. The Anderson family established a TPE foundation dedicated to improving training for law enforcement in missing children cases and providing support for families experiencing similar tragedies. The Kevin Anderson Foundation for Child Safety has already assisted 34 families dealing with missing children and funded training programs that emphasize importance of investigating trusted community members. Kevin's death cannot be undone, but his legacy can help protect other children. Michael explained during the Foundation's 2020 inaugural event. If our tragedy prevents even one family from experiencing what we went through, then Kevin's life will have had meaning beyond the 7 years he was with us. The house where Pierce lived was eventually demolished, and the property was converted into a small park, with a playground dedicated to Kevin's memory. A memorial plaque simply reads, Kevin Anderson, 2008-2015. Loved son, neighborhood friend, forever in our hearts. The neighborhood of Maple Street never fully recovered from the revelation that a predator had lived among them for decades. Several families moved away, unable to cope with the knowledge that they had trusted their children with a murderer. Those who remained struggled with guilt about missing warning signs that, in retrospect, seemed obvious. We all trusted Harold Pierce completely, said Robert Thompson, neighbor who had allowed his own children to visit Pierce's home regularly. The idea that someone could maintain such a convincing facade while being a monster underneath challenges everything you think you know about judging character. For Michael and Lisa Anderson, the discovery of their son's remains allowed them to finally begin genuine grief process that had been impossible during 8 years of uncertainty. Kevin was buried in Cedar Rapids Memorial Cemetery in June 2023, exactly 8 years after his disappearance, in a ceremony attended by more than 500 people from the community that had never forgotten him. Having Kevin back, being able to bury him properly, gives us a kind of peace we hadn't experienced in 8 years, Lisa said. We know where he is now. We know what happened. Justice has been served. It doesn't bring him back, but it allows us to finally say goodbye. The case remains a stark reminder that evil can hide behind familiar faces, and that parents' worst fears sometimes prove justified. Kevin Anderson's story demonstrated both the devastating impact of child predators and the extraordinary lengths that loving parents will go to seek truth and justice for their children, no matter how long it takes or what risks they must face. After 8 years of agonizing uncertainty, Kevin Anderson finally rests in peace, knowing that his father never gave up searching for him and that justice was ultimately served. His memory lives on through a foundation dedicated to protecting other children, and in hearts of a community that learned that vigilance, even among trusted neighbors, is the price of keeping children safe.